Hi, this is CA, Clarity Apogensis, and I am an esoteric student and a practitioner. This is my first video and here on this channel, and yeah, I wanted to start a series kind of on the esoteric teachings of the tarot as, both a deck of cards, but also as a system of magical knowledge as it relates to the Hermetic Kabbalah. Being myself a student engrossed in this topic currently, I'm not going to claim any sort of expertise on matters. I would say, probably about 2 to 3 years of experience in kind of esoteric studies, on and off. Some of those years a lot more rigorously this past year, especially. Rather than a form of expertise, I see this set of videos that I plan to create as a means to dialogue between you and I, you the viewer, I kind of the speaker, I guess, in this case, so that we may learn together, make mistakes along the way, but better ourselves as we improve upon our understanding of this mystical science. Specifically, what I want to investigate here are the cards in series, starting with the trumps, also known as the major arcana, and then following up with the small cards. And we will be viewing this through the lens of the Hermetic Kabbalah. Specifically, my background is Golden Dawn style magical systems previously, moving more toward the Thelemic magical systems. So be forewarned that Thelema will be a somewhat insignificant influence in this, as well as Golden Dawn style like mysticism. So before we get into the actual cards though, I wanted this first video to be a brief overview of some of the symbolism that we will be exploring, primarily through the view of the Tree of Life. I wanted it to be somewhat beginner friendly so that someone with little to no understanding of what Kabbalah entails can leap right into it. That being said, I'm not really going to go over the history of the tarot. I will be utilizing the tarot kind of as it developed after the influence of Eliphas Levi. So that will be sort of our primary jumping off point. I want to give kind of, a few parts, or kind of like a summary of what this video will entail. So first we're going to go over a brief crash course on what the Hermetic Kabbalah is and what sort of symbolism it entails. After that, I want to go over the Sephiroth in brief, a very brief overview of the Sephiroth that are on the Tree of Life, Kabbalah's primary symbol. And then after that, we will discuss the paths in brief and how these relate to the tarot. Lastly, I will be going over the interpretation that I plan to be using as we proceed forward through this series, and end with a couple of book recommendations for anyone interested in self-study, which I, of course, in sort of this complex of a topic, I highly recommend that. So yeah, let's go ahead and get right into it. So kind of briefly going over the Kabbalah, Hermetic Kabbalah is actually an extension of first Jewish Kabbalah from kind of early Rabbinic Judaism, and Christian Kabbalah later, that emerged, I believe, around the Renaissance era. And what it does is it expands first upon, Christian Kabbalah expanded upon this Jewish Kabbalah, and then by virtue of that, Hermetic Kabbalah expanded upon Christian Kabbalah. It incorporates sort of a melting pot of perennialist ideas into its system. Some of the features, of course, influenced by the Golden Dawn and the magical revival of the 20th century. Some of its features are things such as Hermeticism. Enochian angel magic is now kind of a factor in this as well. Theurgy, a very ornate, complex ritual, and, of course, the tarot as well is a huge influence. And it's a tarot that we will be primarily focusing on. Some of the influence on kind of the Kabbalistic view of the tarot stretches all the way back to the Sefer Yetzirah, which was a early Jewish like Kabbalistic text that was one of the foundational ones. It discusses, I believe, the 32 paths of wisdom, as they're called, and this will, as we will see, map to the Tree of Life. So tarot happens to be kind of my primary interest in this whole set, like, ecosystem of symbols and workings. Not only because, like, it's very obviously like it's very beautiful to look at a deck of cards, but also because in many ways it's sort of a book detailing the mystical teachings of the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life. Levi himself once stated, here I can quote it now, "A prisoner devoid of books, had he only the tarot, which he knew how to make use of, could in a few years acquire a universal science and converse with an unequal doctrine of inexhaustible eloquence." So yeah, there's a lot to be gained from these cards. And sort of on that note, jumping right in, we're going to take a look at the Tree of Life, which is that principal symbol in the Kabbalah. In here, let me pull up a visual image as well. This is taken from Aleister Crowley's Liber ABA, Magic in Theory and Practice, but this is the Tree of Life in essence. Here we go. Here we go. Rather bulky book. So yeah, this is the Tree of Life, and it is kind of the primary symbol, as already stated, of Kabbalah. It is a glyph that, in essence, represents the descent of divine light into the realm of matter through the 22 paths and the 10 Sephira. These Sephira, which are the spheres on the Tree of Life, represent sort of the energies, like the types of energies that the divine can manifest as it descends, whereas the paths are sort of these channels which the energies travel down. And the divine, kind of in this viewpoint, it will descend in the form of a flaming sword, but the magician or the aspirant will travel up in the symbol of the Serpent of Wisdom. So the flaming sword is straight shot 1 through 10 down the Tree of Life. The Serpent of Wisdom is a more winding path that seeks to traverse the 22 paths of the Tree of Life, in pursuit of wisdom and higher understanding. So this represents a pretty cohesive symbol of like both the flaming sword and the Serpent of Wisdom. This is actually taken from the Golden Dawn Ritual Tarot, which was a primary source in sort of my studies of the tarot. So yeah, we'll go ahead and jump right into it. We're going to go through the 10 Sephira pretty briefly. Anyone who's looking for a more in-depth overview, I would recommend Garden Pomegranates by Israel Regardie. That is a very good book on the Tree of Life and its Sephira and the paths. So we'll begin with the first Sephira, which is Keter, and this translates to crown. This is the divine, kind of both prior to the creation of duality and also after non-duality has been achieved, depending on whether or not we are descending into matter or ascending up to the divine. Keter is a non-dual sphere, and it can be thought of sort of as enlightenment, the ultimate goal of the aspirant who is seeking to attain its nirvana thing. All those phrases kind of point toward Keter, which is this non-dual sphere that is unfortunately kind of beyond our comprehension in some ways and very impossible to put into logical wording given its non-dual nature. From Keter, we have the outpouring of energy into the second sphere, the second of the Sephira, or the second Sephira, which is Chokmah. Chokmah it translates to wisdom, and it is very much a reflection of Keter. It is the first expression of duality and is the first expression of gender on the tree of life as well. It is the divine masculine, and in this regard, it is full force. It is the archetype of masculinity, the archetype of energy, force, action, and movement. Um, and kind of in this way, it's sort of like, how you have the yin and the yang. We'll see that sort of interplay as well here with the Cicero. And Chokmah is force in its highest form. It is represented by a line, so something with absolute magnitude but no shape. After Chokmah, we have Bina, which is bringing balance to the masculine force of Chokmah. Bina is the archetypal feminine. It's the archetypal form-giving Sephira. It is, it translates to understanding, and what it does is it takes the force that it receives and it forms it. It creates form out of that force. So it is a giver of shape, a giver of formation. Very much in this regard, it is kind of like the great womb from which all is brought forth. It can be thought of as a triangle or as a two-dimensional plane. Crowley will sort of use, it's called the Naples arrangement, and we'll get into that later, but the Naples arrangement, for example, sees Bina as the two-dimensional plane still beyond the realm of full human comprehension, us being 3D beings, but the thing that first gives rise to shape. It is something that is, almost tangible, but not quite for us. And so these three Sephiro are the supernal triad. They are existing above this realm, or this space called the abyss. The abyss kind of being where human understanding sort of reaches its limits, and these are above it. So that's why we have to use somewhat abstract terminology when describing them, because they aren't very easy to comprehend kind of in our material, like dualistic like world that we live in and day in and day out. However, after this, we will go on to some forms that are a bit more recognizable, and these Sephirotic powers will get less and less abstract as we go down. So next, what we're going to be looking at is the fourth Sephira, Chesed. This translates to mercy, and it is the first step toward materializing that energy that was received from the supernal triad above. It is the foundation of the manifest universe, essentially. It is, in some terminology, it's Jupiter. Could be described as like the demiurge. If you lean more toward like a Gnostic theology, it is the God that thinks it's God in that instance. I personally don't really ascribe to kind of like the demiurgic like ideology as much anymore, but if you do, Hesed is seen sort of as that demiurgic force. It is, it is the giver of form, but like by means of force as well. So it is kind of the first androgyne, with the exception of Keter, of course, which comes like prior to the creation of gender polarity. Hesed is the first of like the androgynous Sephiro, which we will see all of these will be, though they may be masculine or feminine, their energies are sort of a blended androgynous energy. After Hesed, which gives foundation, we have Geburah, or severity. This one is a very misunderstood, I would say, Sephira. It is the great destroyer on the tree of life. It takes the form created by Hesed and breaks it down, very trial by fire, I guess you would say. However, while this is kind of an unfortunate force to contend with, especially in our personal lives, us being kind of at the bottom of the tree of life, this comes to us as a very violent sort of force, a very disturbing and upsetting upending even. But it's really important to remember, I believe, that it's only kind of by destroying the old that we are able to reform something new and better. It is by fire that steel is tempered, essentially. But after this, we achieve a bit more balance in the sphere of Tiphareth. This is translates to beauty, and this is the sixth Sephira. It lies at the center of the Tree of Life and is kind of the sphere of ultimate balance, of healing, and it is one of the first stops for the magician and kind of our physical incarnation. It is the main stop that we want to aspire toward. It is the realm of the Holy Guardian Angel or the Redeemer, our higher self, however you like to term it. That lies here. It is the the sphere of like healing. And after that, we go into the seventh, which is Netzach. And this is where, again, these Sephirot lose another layer of abstraction. This is the kind of, we are able to comprehend these spheres like with our mind more directly. In fact, they have they play into how our minds function to some degree. So Netzach is it translates to victory, and this is the sphere kind of our emotions, our instincts. It is the sphere of art, music, creativity. The muse, for example, is thought to be like sourced from the sphere. It can be thought of as kind of the right brain if you're into that sort of like left brain, right brain kind of concept. It could be thought of as the right brain there. And then Hod, which is the eighth, is the balance to Netzach. And this is, again, a thing that we see in the Tree of Life is usually like the Sephira that comes after one is the balance to the one that comes after. Take, for example, Hakma, Bina, and then Hesed and Geburah. And so here we have Netzach and Hod. And Hod is splendor, is what it translates to. It governs the intellectual, the analytical, the communicative. This is a very mercurial sphere. In fact, Mercury is the planet associated with the sphere. And, it governs writing, it governs words, and in that regard, it has some power over magic itself, given that magic is primarily communicated through words of power in the Western Esoteric Tradition. Thoth and Hermes also are gods that correspond to the sphere as well, further strengthening that sort of magical correspondence. This is our left brain, this is our logical thinking, you could say. After that, we have Yesod, which is foundation. This is the ninth. And this one is very interesting in that it is reflected in the 10th very clearly. Yesod is you could call it the astral realm, in a sense. It is kind of the, subtle matter. It is the blueprint what is to come manifest in the physical first appears on. And this is really interesting in terms of magic and in terms of sort of divination as well, which is a big part of the tarot divination is, because Yesod being the blueprint, things appear there first, and we can either use the powers of Yesod to make predictions about what will become manifest, or we can manipulate its astral currents to make manifest our desires. It also has a strong tie to the moon, which is, I would say, definitely important kind of in the spirit of witchcraft as well, which is very lunar focused. And it has a strong tie to the subconscious. You could think of this kind of the, our inner voice, or our kind of the parts of us that dictate parts of us, but we do not quite understand. It is, it's very, I would say, it's very here and now. And then, speaking of the here and now, we lastly come to Malkut, which is the kingdom, is its translation. This is where we find ourselves directly. This is the physical world. This is the sphere of manifestation. This is the high energy of Keter coming finally to rest within its like this final Sephira before it begins its ascent. And yeah, those are the 10 Sephiroth on the sphere of, or the Tree of Life, apologies. And there is a lot more that could be said about these, of course. For the sake of time, we're not really going to get into that. We may touch on it a bit more once we get to the small cards of the tarot, which primarily handle the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life. But we're starting with the trumps, the major arcana. So we're going to move on to the paths really quick. And it's these paths that the major arcana will be dealing with. So these are the 22 paths that were previously alluded to that make up the connections between the Sephiroth. If we look one more time at our graph right here, you can see there's paths connecting these spheres. That is what our focus will be kind of right now. And yeah, these 22 paths correspond to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, amongst other correspondences as well. So we're not going to go into great depth on this at this time, as we will do it kind of on a card-by-card basis as this series progresses. But these 22 paths are part of, like, they have their roots again in the Sefer Yetzirah, which notes a three-part division between the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So we have three mother letters, and I'd like to preface, please excuse my pronunciation, I'm very bad at pronunciation. But we have three mother letters, and those are Aleph, Mim, and Shin. 7 double letters, which are Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Kaf, Pe, Resh, and Tal. And then 12 simple letters, He, Vav, Zayin, Chef, Teth, Yod, Lamed, Nun, Semek, Ayin, Zadi, and Kof. And what's interesting about these is that this three-part division maps very closely to first the three elements with those mother letters. So we have air, we have fire, and we have water, so excluding earth in this context. And then the 7 doubles are the 7 classical planets of astrology, and the 12 simple letters can be mapped to the zodiac. And yeah, that I think will kind of give the main thrust of our knowledge whenever we begin to examine these cards, as these are correspondences that are directly imprinted on the cards themselves as well. Lastly, I'd want to consider again the concept of force and form, as was briefly touched on in the discussion of the Sephiroth. So this is also played out on the Tree of Life itself as a glyph. The Sephiroth are thought of as forms. You know, they're stable energies in a certain form. They are kind of stationary in that regard, though they are energies. The paths then represent the masculine aspect of the Tree of Life. It represents the forces on the Tree of Life that move between these Sephiroth. These are the paths that connect them, and the paths which the aspirant traverses in their study and their magical practice. So by studying the trumps of the tarot, the 22 cards of the tarot, we are studying the forces that flow across the Tree of Life in a way very similar to like how blood flows through our own bodies. At least that's how I think of it, which is very, very exciting. So that was our overview of kind of the primary like principles of Kabbalah as they're going to relate to the tarot. And lastly, I want to go over again the interpretation that I will be using as we explore this. So there are kind of a multitude of ways to interpret the tarot. There is really no one correct way. That being said, rather than asserting any sort of like authority on my part saying my way or the highway in this, I'm not going to do that. Rather, I want to provide my sources up front, provide like where I'm coming from, what I'm working with. So primary to my sources will be Israel Regardie's The Golden Dawn, specifically its brief discussions on the tarot. This will probably be the first thing that I reference in any video on the cards. However, I will be referencing a few other sources as well. Um, so there will be 2 tarot decks that we will be working with. I did not bring any with me on this desk here, so apologies for that. We will see them in the future, but we'll be working with 2 tarot decks. The first will be a somewhat more traditional, air quotes around traditional, form of tarot interpretation as it relates to the Golden Dawn. And for this, we will be using the Golden Dawn Ritual Tarot by the Ciceros, that is Chick Cicero and Sandra Tabitha Cicero. They run Golden Dawn temples in the US, I believe. I'm not really too sure about their structure. I do know their books were very informative for me, especially starting out, and so I'm immensely indebted in that regard. So that will be one primary lens of interpretation. The other, of course, and this is more toward the direction I'm moving currently, will be the Thoth Tarot of Crowley, and that includes the Book of Thoth, which is a very murky and dense book, as most of Crowley's writings are. So, to kind of admit humility here, I will also be referencing Lon Milo Duquette's work that helps provide some clarity on this book when needed, as well, though I will be trying to stick to Crowley's original words as close as possible. And yeah, those are sort of the two primary books, plus the Golden Dawn book, so 3, triplicity, that I will be using as we work toward this understanding of the tarot. That being said, I hope that this series of videos are going to provide a very thorough sort of understanding of these cards, especially on their more esoteric and magical aspects. However, I don't really see these as anything more than an introductory or jumping off point on a subject that whole libraries could be filled with information about. That so for that reason, I do of course encourage anyone interested in deeper study to go off on their own as well and read some of the books on the matter. Some personal ones that I would recommend, as we've already mentioned, the Golden Dawn Ritual Tarot and the Book of Thoth are both 2 I'll be sourcing from. Those are 2, therefore, primary recommendations. With regard to the Book of Thoth, if you are interested in this more thelemic path, but you're very new to it, Lon Milo Duquette has the book Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot, which again helps put a lot of the Book of Thoth into clear terminology, a more beginner friendly understanding. So those are some primary resources. I would say as well a personal favorite of mine, though we will not be using it in this series of videos, is Tarot, A Key to Wisdom of the Ages by Paul Foster Case. This is the book used for the BOTA tarot card set, which is an offshoot of the Golden Dawn, one of the original kind of branches from the original Golden Dawn split, and it's primarily a correspondence course. This was the book that I got started on the tarot with whenever I bought my first tarot book years ago, and it is the book that I'm greatly indebted to for putting me on the path of study toward the Hermetic Kabbalah, because before this I was veering more toward the New Age, since that is what was most directly kind of within my sphere of, within my sphere. This book is a personal favorite of mine for that reason. I read it at a very pivotal time, and again, forever indebted to it. Honorable mention, of course, though I will admit I haven't read it personally. I can, of course, recommend it to anyone working with the most popular of the tarot decks out there, the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, and that is Arthur Edward Waite's book, A Key to the Tarot. This is, again, from one of the members of the original Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, so you're getting it very straight from the source if you're interested in that golden dot in magic. I do believe that there were blinds in this book. I can't quite recall if it was this book or if it was another book by Eliphas Levi that had blinds situated within the book. So, always I would say it's always best to kind of be cautious of that. Honestly, in any books that you read on the occult, it's always good to be both like receptive of the information but also critical of it as well, because this is a very niche, I guess you would say, field of interest, and it is a very difficult one to navigate. Separating the wheat from the chaff, I believe. Separating the wheat from the chaff. That being said, author Edward Waite's book is amazing. I haven't read it personally, so I can't comment my personal thoughts on it, but I can attest to its history as a very important book in understanding of the tarot, especially in the modern day. And yeah, that was sort of our introduction here. So yeah, look out for that next video. We'll be going over the 0th card of the Trumps first, which is the Fool. And we'll be kind of deep diving into what it represents using some of the information from this video and some of these sources that I had mentioned that I will be drawing on. And yeah, if you like this video, feel free to leave a like. Just down in the comments, let me know kind of what you thought. But I look forward to moving forward with this in the future. And I wish the best for every last one of you. And yeah, bye.